Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're not just exploring the vast landscape of what we know. We're diving into the very bedrock of how we know it.
Yeah, it's that fundamental human quest, isn't it, to understand the architecture of our own thoughts, the profound processes of cognition itself.
That's right. And we're embarking on a pretty serious philosophical journey today. We're digging into Edmund Husserl's work, Formal and Transcendental Logic. It sounds heavy, I know.
It can be, definitely. But let me be clear right up front. This isn't abstract philosophy just for, a dusty academic shelf.
Right.
This is really about the foundational principles of all scientific thinking, the very scaffolding we use to build our understanding of the world. It's rigorous, for sure, but it promises some genuinely illuminating aha moments.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to peel back the layers of Husserl's radical reevaluation of logic. He really pushes us beyond its traditional forms, what he calls the naive forms, to uncover these deeply hidden subjective processes that actually constitute all knowledge and meaning. So we'll be dissecting how judgments get formed, how truth is established.
And how our consciousness actively, almost creatively, builds the reality we experience. And just to remind everyone, everything we discuss, as always, is drawn directly from the source material you've shared with us.
Yep. And this deep dive is really for anyone who's ever wondered, what makes an argument truly valid? Or what genuinely grounds scientific inquiry?
Or even considered how our own minds might be shaping the reality we perceive. We're offering you, hopefully, a bit of a shortcut to understanding these incredibly complex ideas.
Aiming for those moments of insight without, the information overload.
Exactly. Let's spark some insight.
Okay, let's get into it. We're starting with Husserl's bold re-envisioning of logic, moving from this traditional or naive approach, as he calls it, to something much deeper. Transcendental inquiry.
Right.
And he kicks things off with a pretty significant critique of how logic's been historically understood and practiced.
He really does. Husserl identifies what he sees as a central problem that emerged, particularly after the Enlightenment. It's about how modern sciences, despite their, undeniable success and fruitfulness—
Yeah, they achieved so much.
They did. But in doing so, they essentially abandoned the critical self-justification that characterized earlier philosophy. He points out that logic, which was initially seen as the torchbearer for method, the theory of pure cognition.
The foundation.
The very foundation. It paradoxically lagged far behind in its development after the scientific revolution of the 17th century.
So after figures like Galileo changed the game in natural sciences, and Descartes tried to find a new, true logic in his Discours de la Méthode, the sciences took off like a rocket.
They did. But Husserl suggests there was a remarkable reversal here.
Well, what was that reversal exactly?
Well, the sciences became incredibly specialized, incredibly effective at solving problems within their own domains. They developed these sophisticated techniques, proved their practical certainty through tangible results. Great stuff. But this liberation from philosophy also led to what Husserl calls a naivete of a higher level.
Naivete of a higher level. That sounds odd.
It does, doesn't it? But the insight is that science, in its eagerness to discover what is, sort of inadvertently stopped asking how it was justified in its very knowing.
Oh, okay. So it became effective, but maybe critically ungrounded.
Precisely. Ungrounded in its ultimate principles. They built these magnificent structures, but without constantly appealing back to the pure idea, without rigorously justifying their methods by pure principles and these ultimate a priori possibilities. It was a profound shift.
From seeking absolute grounding to a more pragmatic, operational approach.
Exactly. Successful, yes, but lacking that deeper self-aware foundation.
So it's almost like they put on blinders, as the text suggests. They got incredibly good at seeing deeply into their specific fields, but lost sight of the bigger picture. This universality of being and its fundamental essential unity that thinkers like Descartes were after with his sapientia universalis, universal wisdom. That's a powerful critique.
It really is. They became very good at, say, illuminating one particular corner of reality.
Right.
But perhaps less skilled at understanding the nature of the light itself or its source,
Yeah, I get that. And Husserl doesn't just blame the specialized sciences for this. He points the finger at logic itself.
He does, quite pointedly. Logic itself shares the blame, because instead of maintaining its historical role as a pure and universal theory of science, the ultimate judge of knowledge, basically logic too, became just another special science.
How to do that?
It failed to make its own final sense a theme for radical considerations. It stopped questioning its own foundations deeply enough and didn't master the hierarchy of problems involved in a truly comprehensive theory of science.
Wow, that's a bold claim. Logic losing its way. And the consequence, Husserl argues, is pretty dire for what he calls the present condition of European sciences. He says they've lost their great belief in themselves, in their absolute significance. That modern humanity doesn't see science anymore as the self-objectivation of human reason or a clear path to a truly satisfying life. That sounds like a real crisis.
It absolutely is. A crisis of meaning, of ultimate purpose for the whole scientific endeavor. It became obscured, leading to this sense of, well, intellectual and maybe even existential disorientation.
Which then brings us to Husserl's positive vision. What logic's true vocation should be.
Exactly, to be an a priori theory of science.
Okay, a priori theory of science. What does that mean in practice?
He clarifies that logic in this sense isn't meant to just empirically investigate existing sciences. It's not about observing how scientists do science, in the lab or whatever.
Right, not descriptive.
Not descriptive. Its goal is to uncover the pure and a priori universalities, to reveal the final ideas that hover dimly before us whenever we are actuated by a purely theoretical interest. It's about getting at the very essence of what genuine knowledge is.
So, laying bare the essential forms of genuine cognition and genuine science, their underlying assumptions, their true methods. Sounds like getting to the absolute bedrock.
It is, the bedrock beneath all the specific discoveries. And to help us grasp this foundational work, he introduces a really key distinction between the formal a priori and the contingent a priori.
Okay, formal versus contingent a priori. Let's break that down.
Right. So the formal a priori refers to the necessary structures that any rational subjectivity, any thinking mind must possess to make sense of the world at all.
Like the absolute basics.
The absolute basics. For example, the very act of judgment necessarily presupposes some hyletic components. Think of that as just raw sensory input.
Okay.
You can't just judge in a total vacuum. There has to be something being judged, some colors, sounds, textures, forms that provide the basic content for consciousness. Raw ingredients, if you like.
Raw ingredients that judgment then works on, organizes.
Precisely. They're the stuff of experience that judgment then structures.
Okay, so the formal a priori is like the fundamental rules of grammar, essential for any language, any meaning. What about the contingent a priori then?
Right. So the contingent a priori, in contrast, refers to those elements that, while we can think about them a priori like, we can conceptualize them without a specific current experience. They aren't essential to any possible rational subjectivity universally. His examples involve things like the specific capacity to sense colors or sounds.
So like the concept of color might be universal for us, but the actual experience of red isn't necessarily a requirement for any thinking being.
Exactly. Another rational mind could theoretically perceive reality through entirely different senses we can't even imagine. It's like, well, the specific vocabulary of language, the grammar might be universal, but the actual words are contingent on that language's history and context.
Got it. So grammar versus vocabulary. That's a helpful analogy. Formal is grammar, contingent is vocabulary.
It captures the essence, yeah. This distinction is really critical because it helps us sort out what truly belongs to pure reason itself versus what's maybe just a feature of our particular type of human experience.
That's powerful. Separating the universally necessary forethought from what's just specific to us. Which brings us to this interesting idea, the two-sidedness of logical thematizing. Husserl sees this as crucial for logic's proper function. Two key directions here.
Yes, initially. The first is what he calls the objective direction.
Objective, okay.
Here, logic looks at the manifold forms of judgment formations and cognitional formations. Think of all the finished products of thought. Concepts, judgments, arguments, proofs, entire scientific theories.
The outputs.
The outputs, exactly. These are seen as having abiding validity, objective validity. They are intersubjectively identifiable meaning. Different people can recognize and agree on them. They exist factually in our shared cultural world, even when no one is actively thinking about them right now.
Like a mathematical theorem. It's just true, whether I'm thinking about it or not.
Perfect example. It's a structure of thought accessible to everyone, ideally.
Okay, that's the objective direction. Then there's the other side.
The subjective direction. And this is where things get really distinctively Husserlian.
Okay.
The subjective direction looks at the deeply hidden subjective forms in which theoretical reason brings about its productions. He's talking about intentionality.
Intentionality, consciousness, always being about something, directed towards something.
That's it. That fundamental property of consciousness. It's in this intentionality, this active aiming or meaning intending of consciousness, that those objective formations we just mentioned have their origin.
So the objective structures actually originate in subjective acts.
That's the claim. And these productive intentionalities, the conscious acts that constitute meaning and being, are usually unconscious or maybe non-thematic. We don't normally reflect on how we form a judgment, we just do it.
Right, it just happens.
But for logic to truly understand itself, Husserl says, these hidden constitutive processes must be uncovered through rigorous reflection.
So it's not enough to just analyze the finished product, the theorem or the theory. We also have to look behind the scenes at the workshop, the subjective acts that created it. That's a huge shift.
A massive shift. And it leads us naturally to think about the cultural world and specifically the ideality of language.
Ideality of language. What does he mean by ideal here?
For Husserl, language isn't just a collection of physical sounds or marks on paper. It possesses an ideal unity. The core idea here is really profound. When we communicate, we're not just swapping physical stuff, we're tapping into a shared ideal meaning.
Like the universal concept of tree exists somehow independently of me saying tree right now.
Exactly. It's that invisible scaffolding that lets us understand each other at all, and it's crucial for logic.
That's a really key distinction. The text uses the example of a treatise or a novel. It's a one-time affair. It doesn't get multiplied every time someone reads it.
Right. It's the same book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Regardless of who reads it or how many physical copies exist. Or think of an engraving or a piece of music like the Kreutzer Sonata, his example. The sonata itself is an ideal unity. Its constituent sounds are ideal components, not just the physical vibrations physics would study.
So the sounds aren't just physics, they're ideal parts of this musical object.
Yes. And for the logician, language is primarily important in its ideality as the identical lingual word, the identical lingual sentence. This ideality gives it an objectivity proper to the objectivities making up the so-called spiritual or cultural world, which is distinct from just bare physical nature.
It's what allows for shared understanding, objective knowledge.
Precisely. It's the basis for it.
So the word democracy isn't just ink or sound waves. It's an ideal unity of meaning, a concept we can all access across time and space. This leads us to thinking as a sense-constituting process.
Right. In its broadest sense, thinking for Husserl covers all the psychic processes in which this act of meaning consists. It's where the signification, the sense of a locution, a word, phrase, sentence gets constituted for both the speaker and the listener.
And it's not just judging, right? It includes other things.
Not just judging. It includes wishing, willing, asking. Anything where meaning is intended. When we speak, he says, we are continuously performing an internal act of meaning which fuses with the words and, as it were, animates them.
Animates them. I like that. Like the meaning is the soul and the words are the body.
That's a very good way to put it. It imbues the mere sounds or marks with their sense, transforming them into vehicles of thought.
Makes communication possible.
Yes. And Husserl notes the dominance of judgment here. Even other kinds of significations, like wishes or questions, can often be absorbed by judicial statements.
How so?
Well, instead of just wishing, may S be P, you can state it as a judgment. I wish that S might be P. You turn the wish into a statement about your wishing.
Ah, okay. You make it descriptive.
Right. And this makes the logic of judgments absolutely central to understanding all forms of expression and meaning constitution. Judgments are the primary way we affirm or deny things about the world, how we structure our understanding of reality.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got this broad overview of Husserl's critique and his vision for logic's true job. Now we can really zoom in on the architecture of formal logic itself, which he calls epiphantic analytics.
Epiphantic analytics. Yes, it sounds a bit intimidating.
It does. But if I'm getting this right, it's basically Husserl's master plan for dissecting the pure grammar of our thoughts, the fundamental rules of judgment itself, totally separate from what we're actually judging about. Is that fair?
That's an excellent way to put it. It is about the pure grammar of judgment. And the idea of formal logic, analyzing propositions or judgments structurally, goes way back
To Aristotle.
to Aristotle, exactly. Husserl credits Aristotelian analytics as the first part of a systematically executed logic. Aristotle's genius was discovering this idea of the pure judgment form.
And that's where the algebra comes in, substituting letters for the content words.
Exactly. Instead of analyzing all men are mortal, he'd use S and P, all S are P. This abstraction revealed the underlying patterns of valid reasoning, independent of the specific content. Leibniz later took this further, dreaming of a mathesis universalis, a universal science of forms.
So this theory of pure forms of judgments is the first discipline of formal logic, and its focus is just on the mere possibility of judgments as judgments, not whether they're true or false yet.
Precisely. It's purely descriptive classification based on form, like categorizing sentence structures. You distinguish simple versus composite judgments, or singular, particular, universal ones.
Okay.
Then you have conjunctive and disjunctive, or hypothetical, if-then, causal judgments. And even the modalizations, like saying, it is certain that S is P, or it is possible that S is P.
So it's like the grammar of pure logic, as he called it, in the logische Untersuchungen. Just the structural rules, the abstract shapes, not the content or truth.
You've got it. That's the first layer.
Okay, so once we have this grammar, these pure forms, we move up a level to consequence logic, the logic of non-contradiction, the second level.
Indeed. This level shifts the focus slightly. It becomes the science of the possible forms of true judgments.
Ah, okay, true judgments now.
Well, the possible forms of true judgments. The goal is to determine the eidetic universal conditions for possible truth or falsity just by inspecting the judgment forms.
Eidetic meaning.
Pertaining to essences. So, looking for the essential universal conditions based purely on form that make truth or falsity possible. It's about identifying valid argument forms, consequent arguments, he calls them, and also spotting analytic contradictions, forms that just can't logically coexist without contradiction. Exclusions, basically.
Right, so this is where we start seeing how judgments relate to each other logically in terms of consistency. But the text says traditional formal logic wasn't purely about non-contradiction, that Husserl wanted more purity here.
Yeah, it means that while traditional logic definitely dealt with non-contradiction, it often kind of mashed together different types of problems within that. Husserl is pushing for a more rigorous separation, to isolate the pure logic of non-contradiction, focusing only on internal consistency and the formal conditions for truth possibility.
To clean things up conceptually.
Exactly. And this sets the stage for the next layer, truth logic.
So how do truth logic and consequence logic relate? Is one inside the other?
They're intimately connected. The big principles of truth logic, like modus ponens and modus tollens.
If P, then Q, P, therefore Q, that stuff.
Right. Those are about the truth of propositions and valid inferences. They have direct analogs back in pure consequence logic. In truth logic proper, we get the big dual principle, contradiction and excluded middle.
Meaning, if a judgment is true, its opposite is false, and one of them has to be true.
Yes. Combined, they assert that any judgment is exclusively one or the other, true or false. No middle ground. It's about the definitive truth state.
A definitive yes or no on truth.
Right. Now, the analog of this back in consequence logic is slightly different, more subjective. It's something like, if two judgments are contradictory, it's not possible for both to be proper judgments, but one of them is possible.
So it's about the possibility of distinctly judging them without immediate collapse into impossibility.
Exactly. It focuses on the possibility of having distinct evidence for one or the other, even before confirming truth. It speaks to the basic constraints on what can even be thought consistently.
This difference between just being possible as a judgment and being actually true seems really important. It leads us into thinking about how we perform judgments, distinctness, clarity, evidence. What's the core idea here?
It does. Husserl gets really meticulous about the nuances of distinctness versus confusion in judgments. He talks about how a confusedly meant sense content, like a vague idea you have, can be spread out, explicated to become distinct.
Like clarifying a fuzzy thought.
Exactly. Think about trying to describe a dream. It starts as a jumble, but as you articulate it, pick the words, connect the bits, it becomes a distinct, coherent narrative. That process of explication makes it distinct.
So there's a difference between just saying a sentence that points to a judgment and the actual performance of making it distinct in your mind. What if, while you're explicating, you find a contradiction?
Ah, good question. If that careful explication reveals a contradiction, it leads to the cancellation annulment of the belief. The belief, which you thought was a coherent whole, suddenly shows itself as null, impossible.
So it dissolves.
It dissolves as an active belief, yes. It still exists in your consciousness as a former belief, maybe, with its articulated sense, but it's no longer something the ego actively holds. It shows that making distinct isn't always about confirming, it can be about invalidating, a critical internal process.
Okay, this leads to a really crucial distinction. Distinctness versus clarity. How are these different? They sound kind of similar.
They do sound similar, and this is subtle but vital. Distinct evidence is when the judgment itself, as a judgment, is properly given. It's the proper performance of judging, where you've fully articulated the judgment structure, you're consciously aware of the precise judgment you are making.
Like perfectly understanding, a square has 4 equal sides and 4 right angles.
Exactly. You grasp the structure, but clarity, or evidence with insight, is when that which the judger wants to attain by way of his judgment is given. This means the object of cognition itself, the adequation of the judgment to the affairs themselves.
So if I then see a square and recognize my distinct judgment perfectly matches the thing I'm seeing, that's clarity.
That's clarity. It's the match between the distinct thought and the self-given object.
Okay, distinctness is about the judgment's internal structure, its proper performance. Clarity is about its connection to reality, its truth, its adequacy to the object.
You've nailed it, and there's a hierarchy. Husserl says, as distinct, every judgment is possible that as an evident cognition is impossible. Meaning, you can distinctly articulate a judgment that can never be true or clearly evidenced. Like a round square exists. You understand the words distinctly, but the concept itself is contradictory. You can never experience it with clarity.
So distinctness is necessary for clarity, but not sufficient.
Exactly. For a judgment to be truly evident with insight, it needs both distinct articulation and adequacy to the actual state of affairs. It emphasizes the deep work involved in really establishing a judgment's legitimacy.
Okay, so we've dug into formal epiphantics, the logic of pure judgment forms. But then Husserl opens up this other huge area, formal ontology. This sounds like moving from the structure of statements to the structure of being itself, or at least the structure of anything that can be thought about.
That's a perfect way to frame it. The problem of formal ontology really emerged for Husserl from thinking about the new mathematics, especially how things like syllogistic algebra could be combined with the mathematics of sets, relations, and so on.
How did that lead to ontology?
Well, it suggested a need for a unitary science. If you can calculate with proposition forms, just like you calculate with numbers, it points towards a universal theory of propositions. And that, in turn, reveals the problem of formal ontology.
Because the rules governing how we talk about things must somehow reflect the rules governing the things themselves in their most abstract form.
Exactly. The aha moment is realizing that the structure of thought implies a structure of possible objects of thought.
So it's a natural extension. Formalizing thought means formalizing the possibilities of what thought can be about.
Precisely. Remember, Aristotelian analytics use the apophasis, the predicative sentence or judgment, as its basic theme. Husserl connects that formal epiphantics directly to formal ontology by pointing out the obvious. Judging is the same as judging about objects, predicating properties of them.
You can't separate the asserting from the what is asserted.
You can't. The act and the object, in its formal sense, are structurally linked.
So they're two sides of the same coin, structurally.
That's how Husserl sees it. He argues that formal ontology and formal epiphantics, despite their expressly different themes, must be very intimately related and are perhaps inseparable.
Why inseparable?
Because all forms of objects, properties, relations, wholes, parts, sets, numbers, you name it, anything whatever, as he says, these all necessarily appear within judgments. So, in all formal distinctions pertaining to judgments, differences among object forms are included.
So when I say a cat is an animal, I'm using object categories like subject, predicate, inclusion.
Exactly. And those categories are formal properties of objects just as much as they are components of judgments. They describe the universal structure of how any object can be related to another or have properties. It's the logic of objecthood itself.
This sounds profound, but the text says this unity wasn't always obvious.
Right.
Why was this idea of formal ontology masked historically?
Several reasons. One was a lack of the concept of pure empty form. The ancients, for example, didn't fully separate their arithmetic from geometry, and their idea of number wasn't fully emptied of all non-formal material.
They couldn't get to the pure abstraction.
Right. Aristotle had a universal ontology of realities, but Husserl says he lacked formal ontology, and therefore lacked also the cognition that formal ontologies is intrinsically prior to the ontology of realities. They saw numbers of things, not number itself as a pure form.
Still too tied to specific examples, like counting apples, not grasping the pure form of threeness.
Exactly. Another issue was the obscurity of ideal objectivity.
Ideal objectivity, like concepts, numbers, logical forms themselves.
Yes, these irreal objects, not physical, but undeniably real in thought and culture. Things like the number two or the concept of justice. Judgment formations themselves are irreal objects. They don't exist like tables. They kind of float obscurely between subjectivity and objectivity.
So?
Well, physical things seem given from outside, right? But logical formations feel given exclusively from inside, exclusively by means of spontaneous activity. And there was this old inherited fear of Platonism positing abstract, non-physical realities that made people kind of blind to the genuine problem here.
Like a fear of saying ideas are more real than chairs. That could seem ungrounded.
It could. And Husserl notes a similar thing happened in math. The sensuous configurations, lines on a blackboard, counting actual objects, these things masked the irreality of the mathematical configurations. People focused on the drawings, the physical counting, not the underlying ideal abstract forms that mathematics really deals with.
The concrete examples hid the abstract essence.
Exactly. Made it harder to grasp pure formal ontology.
So how did Husserl himself get past this masking and introduce formal ontology?
Well, the idea, though not explicitly named formal ontology at first, was already brewing in his big work, the Logische Untersuchungen. He was trying to systematically lay out pure logic.
Okay.
And he points back to his even earlier work, Philosophie der Arithmetik from 1891, as an early phenomenologico-constitutional investigation. There, he was exploring how things like sets and cardinal numbers, what he'd later call categorial objectivities, are actually generated originaliter, meaning originally constituted, from our own spontaneous activities like collecting, counting, relating.
So he was looking at how these abstract concepts, which are kinds of formal being, arise in our consciousness through our mental acts, tracing them back to the mind's activity.
Exactly. He was showing the mind's active work in generating these forms. He started distinguishing signification categories, like proposition, concept, truth about the meaning of judgments, from formal object categories, like object, affair complex, unity, plurality, number, relation, about the structure of what is meant.
And the key is that these formal object categories are empty of specific content. They apply to anything, whatever.
Right, with a most empty universality. They describe the most general ways anything can be an object for thought.
Which implies that formal mathematics for him is originally logical analytics, not just symbol games.
Absolutely. A mathematician might just play the game, not caring about the possible application or the cognitional functioning of their symbols. But the philosophic logician must care about these things. Because for Husserl, the logical sense of math includes a sphere of cognitional functioning, of possible applications. All mathematical forms ultimately find a place as components within judgments. They're intrinsically related to how we think and know. The philosopher wants to know why the rules of the game matter for knowledge itself.
This brings us back to that critical point. Formal analytics is formal ontology. One logic, two attitudes. How do we manage that?
That's the core insight. Logic, as this formal theory of science, operates both as formal apophantics, logic of judgments, and formal ontology, logic of objects. Its big theme is all categorical objectivities in respect of their pure forms. The specific materially filled cores, the actual stuff we sense or think about, remain indeterminately universal, just in X.
So the logician acts like a scientist, but studying the pure forms themselves. A meta-scientist.
Sort of, yes. The logician adopts the scientist's attitude, focusing on their province, the realm of pure forms, and constantly developing theory within it. This highlights the problem of identity. Can the thing I judge about be anything other than my judgment of it?
And his answer is yes.
Yes, it's a categorical objectivity. The judgment about the number two is distinct from the number two itself as an ideal object. They're related, but not identical.
So how do we switch between focusing on the judgment versus focusing on the object. This shift in thematizing interest seems key.
It's the absolute hinge. We can shift our interest from the object province and the categorical objectivities formed out of it, the what of the judgment, to judgments and their components, the how, the structure of the judgment. He prepares this by distinguishing something supposed from something actual.
Meaning, I can analyze the form of "the cat is on the mat" without checking if there actually is a cat on a mat.
Precisely. You treat the judgment itself, the supposition, as your object of analysis.
And this connects to the critical attitude of a real scientist. They don't just make naive judgments.
No, not at all. The scientist, driven by vocational consistency, lives a theoretically interested life. They aim for genuine evidence, even maximally perfect evidence. This involves what Husserl calls zigzag judging.
Zigzag judging.
Yeah, first, making straight for the affairs themselves, seeking direct evidence of the object, then critically stepping back to look at their provisional results, then criticizing the criticism, always guided by an ideal of an evidence that is perfect or perfectible.
Like a sculptor constantly looking back and forth between the model and the clay.
Perfect analogy. And scientific statements are meant to be intersubjective, addressed to this everyone, stating what the substrate objectivities are in truth as everyone can see, aiming for universal validity.
So the judgment in the proper sense of apophantic logic, where does that fit in this zigzag?
It refers to supposed predicatively formed affair complexes as supposed. The focus is squarely on the opinion, the meaning, the supposition itself, rather than directly on the affairs themselves. All other categories function as parts within this supposed complex. It's this focus that allows formal logic to analyze structure without getting lost in the specific content of every science. You take the judgment itself as the object for logical analysis.
What a progression. From naive logic through formal apophantics and ontology, now we're heading into the deepest waters. Transcendental logic, where subjectivity takes center stage, challenging tradition, seeking a transcendental foundation. This feels like the peak of the mountain.
It absolutely is the culmination. And right at the trailhead, we encounter something Husserl famously battled, the bogey of psychologism.
Yes, psychologism. Reducing logic to psychology.
Essentially, yes. It was a major historical hurdle. Ideological formations, judgments, truths, arguments were being misinterpreted as merely psychic activities and habitualities. It basically reduced the objective, ideal validity of logic to subjective, empirical mental processes. Truth becomes just how minds happen to work, not something universally valid.
Which Husserl slammed in his Prolegomena, right? Saying 2 + 2 = 4 isn't just a psychological habit.
Exactly. He fought hard against psychologizing these irreal significational formations. But he also realized a deeper problem remained a universal epistemological psychologism that affected the very meaning of transcendental philosophy.
So even after refuting the simple version, a more subtle version lingered.
Yes. And recognizing that paved the way for his more profound investigation into subjectivity's constitutive role, but crucially, without falling back into the trap of reducing logic to psychology. He wasn't saying logic is psychology, he was asking how subjective experience gives rise to the structures logic studies.
Which leads to a radical rethinking of evidence. Most of us think of evidence as just undeniable fact. But Husserl pushes back.
He really does. He critiques the common view of evidence as just absolute apodicticity, unshakable certainty, often reduced to mere feelings of evidence. He argues this makes getting truth seem like a miracle, some inexplicable flash.
So what is evidence for him?
He defines evidence, sub scibum, as that performance on the part of intentionality which consists in the giving of something itself. It's the primal consciousness of grasping it itself originalia directly in its own self-presentation, not via an image or symbol.
So evidence is an active performance of consciousness, where the object gives itself directly to us. And this has a creative role. That sounds huge.
It is huge. Because evidence involves this self-giving, it establishes rightness, correctness. These moments of evidence are creative, primal institutings of rightness, of truth as correctness. Why? Because they are originally constitutive acts, originally institutive of sense and being for the objectivities themselves.
Wow, so it's in the direct experience, the evidence, that being and sense are first established and confirmed for us. Consciousness isn't passive.
Not at all. It's an active participant in constituting the meaning and reality of what we know.
A powerful claim about the mind's role. This implied a deep correlation of objectivity and evidence.
Absolutely. Husserl states flatly, category of objectivity and category of evidence are perfect correlates. For every fundamental type of object, real, ideal, whatever, there's a corresponding fundamental type of evidence.
So different kinds of things require different kinds of evidence.
Yes, and this implies a great task. Exploring all these modes of evidence, understanding their extremely complicated harmonizing performances that point towards each other, he wones again seeking only apodictic, absolutely indubitable, and absolutely finished in itself insight.
So it's not about one perfect flash of certainty.
No. It's about understanding the whole intricate network of evidential processes. And for Husserl, crucially, the intrinsically first evidences are those of experience pertaining to natural objects.
Everyday experience.
Everyday experience. And importantly, even imperfect experience can still adjust and correct itself. Think about just seeing something, first vaguely, then clarifying, maybe correcting a misperception. This shows evidence is a living, dynamic process, not static. Our everyday experiences, flawed as they are foundational, constantly refining themselves.
So how do we get from these basic everyday experiences to complex judgments on logical principles? This is the sense genesis of judgments, like an archaeological dig into thought.
That's a wonderful analogy. Sense genesis means an unraveling of the sense moments that are implicit in and belong essentially to the sense that has plainly come to light. Judgments, as finished products, have a sort of historicalness. Their final sense points back to original sense.
Like digging through layers of meaning.
Exactly. The phenomenologist unearths the layers of meaning and experience that constitute a judgment's final sense.
And this tracing back leads to the primal evidences of experience.
Yes, down to the lowest level, judgments about individuals. This means the intrinsically first judgment theory is the theory of evident judgments, and the starting point is tracing our predicative assertions back to non-predicative evidence called experience.
So the experiential judgment, based directly on immediate experience, is the original judgment.
It's the most basic assertion, yes. And all the higher syntaxes, the stuff of formal analytics, ultimately arise from this foundation. Without understanding this genesis, we miss the ground floor.
And understanding these origins helps uncover hidden presuppositions in logical principles. The text gives that interesting example. The sum of the angles of a triangle is equal to the color red. It's grammatically okay, but just wrong.
It's utterly senseless, right? Husserl argues it violates the law of excluded middle because it can't be true or false. It has no sense. Traditional logic, quite obviously, does not have in mind such judgments when it states its laws.
So logic implicitly assumes some kind of basic coherence.
Yes, it assumes a content homogeneity. Judgments must relate to a unitary sphere of experience to even be eligible for logical laws to apply. If the concepts are totally incommensurable, logic doesn't bite. This shows why we need an intentional judgment theory, one that looks at meaning constitution, not just grammar.
This is all building, isn't it? Towards the really radical conclusion, the need for transcendental phenomenology as the ultimate ground feels like a philosophical revolution.
It truly is. Husserl notes that traditional logic, by relating to a real world and assuming truth in itself, basically acts like one of the positive sciences, meaning it treats the world as an antecedent, unquestioned matter of fact. It doesn't critically ask how the world, or truths about it, come to be constituted for us in the first place. It just assumes the stage is set.
So the old Cartesian problem comes back. How does the outside world, transcendent reality, get its sense of being outside within my own inner experience, the immanence of the ego?
That is the absolute core question. Husserl states it emphatically. Everything that is truth would relate back to the universal subjectivity and ultimately to my universal subjectivity, to me, qua ego.
Wow.
This is constitutive subjectivity. Every existent, with all the sense in which it exists for me, is constituted within my subjectivity of consciousness. He then calls trying to explain this inner data by hypothesizing an objective reality a consummate absurdity. All the problems, he says, lie entirely in this ego himself, in his actualities and possibilities of consciousness.
Okay, hold on. That sounds incredibly radical. My first thought is solipsism, the idea that only my mind exists. That's unsettling.
It's the natural immediate reaction, and Husserl is very aware of it. He carefully addresses it. He explains that while all objective being and truth have their grounds in transcendental subjectivity, objective being is the synthetic unity of actual and potential intentionality. It's the coherent structure within consciousness.
But how does that avoid solipsism?
Through intersubjectivity. He posits a plurality of coexisting absolute subjects, monads, whose cooperative acts constitute community products. The world gets constituted as objective, meaning there for everyone, within an intersubjective cognitive community. My experience includes experiencing other people experiencing the world, and that shared experience validates and shapes my own, creating objectivity.
So the sense of everyone and others also has to be constituted within my ego. I experience others through my subjectivity.
Precisely. The sense of other people needs constitution, ultimately pointing back to the primordial ownness of my transcendental ego. My ego contains the motivational foundation for constituting genuine transcendencies, including other egos and, through them, an objective world. So, phenomenology doesn't annul the world or others. It seeks to understand them, to clarify how they are given to us.
It clarifies the fact that others and the world have sense in and from me.
Yes, it takes that as a presented fact and seeks to understand its structure, not deny it.
This also relates to the idealizations of science, like being in itself, truth in itself. Formal logic uses them, but phenomenology sees them as truly great problems.
Right. Take the exact nature of physics with its ideal space and time. Formal logic can work with these consistent idealizations. But transcendental phenomenology asks, how are these idealizations constituted in consciousness? How do we get from our messy, subjective experience of space and time to the abstract, objective space-time of physics?
So it digs into the origins of even the most objective-seeming concepts.
Exactly, showing their roots in subjective, constitutive processes.
So where does this all culminate? What is the ultimate logic after this transcendental turn?
For Husserl, it's not a second logic, separate from the formal one. It's radical and concrete logic itself, achieved via phenomenology. It's a deep amplification of logic that reduces all the principles of objective logic to their originary and legitimate, their transcendental phenomenological sense.
So it gives the objective principles their deepest grounding by showing how they arise in consciousness. It doesn't replace them, but justifies them.
Precisely. It provides their ultimate philosophical justification.
And formal ontology fits into this too. The logic of objects is still valid, just understood more deeply.
Exactly. A formal ontology of any possible world, as constituted in transcendental subjectivity, is just one part of a bigger formal ontology covering everything that exists in any sense, including transcendental subjectivity itself. This original grounding gives all sciences and their logics unity as branches of a constituted production from the one transcendental subjectivity.
A unified vision of knowledge rooted in consciousness. This seems to bring a nuance to absolute truth, suggesting relativity is involved somehow. Is there any absolute truth left?
It's a subtle point. Husserl acknowledges that each and every truth about reality remains involved in relativities by virtue of its essence, yet we still have regulative ideas as norms. He uses the example of market truth.
Market truth.
Yeah, the truth relevant to a trader is the price fair. Will this pay off? In that context, it's a good one and the best that a trader can use. Practical, context-dependent truth. He warns against being dazzled by exact sciences as the only model of truth. Different contexts need different kinds of truth and evidence.
So truth is always relative to a horizon, even while aiming at an ideal.
That seems to be the idea. Truth isn't just out there. It's actively constituted and validated through intentional acts within specific contexts, even as we aim for ideal norms.
So wrapping up this incredible journey.
Yeah.
From naive logic's limits through formal analytics and ontology to the necessity of transcendental inquiry. It all culminates in transcendental phenomenology.
Precisely. It's a massive philosophical effort to get a genuine theory of science, grounding all knowledge rigorously in the self-understanding of transcendental subjectivity. It shows logical principles aren't just handed down. They're constituted by the active processes of our consciousness. Understanding that constitution is philosophy's highest task, a call to profound self-awareness.
What an incredible deep dive, really, into the very architecture of pure thought. We've traced Husserl's path from his critique of naive logic through the detailed structure of apophantic analytics and formal ontology, the being of anything whatever, and landed in the radical project of transcendental phenomenology, revealing consciousness as the source of all meaning and being.
It's a profound challenge to how we usually think, isn't it? Husserl really forces us to look beyond just what we know, to deeply consider how we know it, and to grasp the vital, often unseen role of subjectivity and grounding everything we consider objective knowledge. It's truly a journey into the architecture of our own minds.
Revealing those deep, complex layers beneath what we just take for granted as truth or reality. And that leaves us, as always, with a provocative thought for you to take away. If all objective being and truth are, as Husserl argues, ultimately constituted within transcendental subjectivity, what does that really imply about the nature of reality itself and our place in it?
Yeah, does it mean our subjective experience is somehow more fundamental than we normally assume? Maybe even the very wellspring of all meaning?
And what new responsibilities does that place on us as knowers? As beings who constitute meaning as we navigate the world, we encourage you to reflect on these deep, often hidden processes that shape your own understanding.